Hello and welcome to another session of the OASBO 2020 Virtual Trade Show. My name is Ben Miller and I work for Garmann & Miller. We're an architectural firm in Ohio. Today we're going to speak to you a little bit about COVID-19 best practices. Before I begin, I just want to say a thank you to OASBO for having us speak today. We really appreciate it. Garmann & Miller recently just joined OASBO a few months ago and became a sponsor and a partner. And so we really look forward to the opportunity of working with the organization, the people within it, to bring some value for your discussions, your webinar, and your training sessions. So thanks again for having us, and we look forward to speaking with you today. And our firm has some really talented folks, and today we're very fortunate enough to have two of them join us. Andrew Hilsman, who is a mechanical engineer and also the director of engineering at our firm, is going to speak today, along with Becky Boimer, who is our Director of Interior Design. So just to kind of set the tone a little bit, Garmann & Miller is, like I said, an architectural and engineering firm. So we are located both in Columbus, Minster, Ohio, which is kind of mid-northwest Ohio, and Indianapolis. We're a multidiscipline full-service firm. And what that means is we have architecture, engineering, interior design, technology. We kind of consider ourselves a one-stop shop service center. If there's any needs out in the industry, you can come to us, and we got it all under one roof. We consider ourselves an expert in K-12 education. We have completed over 1,000 projects in Ohio with K-12, and we were recently awarded a top 20 firm in the Midwest. So what do architects and engineers do? You know, in the service industry, you know, obviously our first and foremost is we serve you, everyone out in the community. But one of our biggest goals in the K-12 world is to keep students and staff, we like to say, warm, safe, and dry. Those are our three goals. And when we do that, we make the educational mission successful. So today, when we talk about COVID-19, one of the big focuses is on safety, as you can imagine. So when we were asked to speak, we kind of wanted to talk about, you know, how does an architectural engineering service firm fit in the OASBO world? We understand within OASBO, there's facilities, there's maintenance, there's AR, accounting and finance, HR, transportation, you know, all these things come together to make up the Ohio Association of School Business Officials. And so as an architect and an engineer in the service industry, we kind of relate mostly to the facilities, custodial maintenance, and transportation side of things. As you can imagine, that relates to operations, to buildings, just what architects and engineers work on. And what's really fascinating is how that all ties to the financial side. Again, budgets, building construction, life cycle costs, these are all things that we focus on a daily task. You know, out in the world today, COVID-19, I feel like is just a pandemic no one was ready for and prepared. And one of the most important things you could take away so far is that COVID-19 impacts every district and every person in a unique way. To say that one community is impacted the same as another is not true. There's various situations and issues that come up due to COVID-19 that one school district experiences not the same as another. So with that, when we go through our best practices from Andrew and Becky here in a few minutes, just remember that not every practice that we propose or talk about today fits and works for your district. We understand it's a unique situation, so it requires a unique solution to all your problems. And I guess one of the other takeaways, as an architect and engineer, we really see anybody in the school district, whether you're a superintendent, a board member, working in the financial side, it's going to take a really collaborative effort along with architects and engineers to come up with unique solutions to the problems that you run into relating to COVID-19. You know, situations change daily, information changes daily. So by putting our creative minds out in the industry, when we have connections to equipment, to reps, to information, we can tie that into your issues and come up with a really unique solution to your problem. So to kind of understand COVID-19 and the issues that you run into, we kind of did a simple graph here that talks about what are some of the effective strategies out there that you're using today, I'm sure, and that everybody's aware of, and how do you improve on that? So if you look at this chart, it's a simple reminder that from the most effective being the top all the way to the least effective being on the bottom. Most effective being elimination, which, relates to the school districts going to virtual. You're taking the students, the staffs, you're separating them out. They're all, in their own areas, eliminates the spread of COVID-19. So, that being the most effective way to battle COVID-19 right now. The next step down, this is kind of where we play in this, and I'll touch on that more here in a little bit, so I'll skip over that. But the bottom two are things that I'm sure a lot of you are implementing now, and that relates to your administrative controls, which are, schedule changes, staggering, drop off, lunches, things like that, to the least effective being PPE, wearing masks, gloves, hand sanitizers. But one thing to take away here is this is a layered approach. PPE along with administrative controls becomes more effective. PPP, administrative controls, and adding in engineering and architectural items can make it even stronger. So with that, I want to kind of dive into what are the engineering and design solutions that we can come up with to help your school. So this is kind of what Andrew, Becky, and I are going to touch on today, what we've learned out in the industry. Now, Garmann & Miller has had a unique opportunity to speak with superintendents, school staff, board members across Ohio through roundtable discussions and just getting to know their experiences. And with that, these are our key takeaways that we've had. So we're going to start out with Andrew kind of covering the HVAC plumbing side. What are some of the lessons he's seen and learned on that side, how to battle COVID-19? And then we're going to transition over to Becky, where she gets into the spaces. How do you reallocate, reconfigure? What are some of the materials that you can select to help reduce the spread? How's the furniture play in with the space? And then switching over to some unique opportunities, maybe not within your building, maybe with outside of your building, to learn and teach within the educational environment. Then we'll flip it over to technology and see how that impacts your learning. And finally, wrap it up with lighting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, where he can kind of dive into the HVAC side of COVID-19.
Hey, thanks, Ben. And so, yeah, diving into HVAC, just like the title states, it's a big deal. You see here a pretty exhaustive list of some of the items that you may have heard of, and some of the items that we've talked about with districts and have been in different studies and things that people are looking for. I think early on, it's kind of debated how much did this virus travel in the air and in aerosols, but every day we learn more that it is kind of floating in the air, which makes the HVAC and control of that environment important. So if we go to the next slide here, this is just a few of them that we wanted to kind of focus on that we've done research on, we've implemented some and talked to different districts about. So I think it's important that, like Ben said, there's a lot of different things to consider here, and there's a lot of different layers, and not all of them work. Some of them work in different places, but the cost and complexity of each of those isn't the same necessarily. So we tried to organize these, in increasing cost and complexity to hopefully show you some of the easy ones that you can implement right away. So the first item is kind of checking out your ventilation systems. So really it's just about checking the basic functionality of the equipment in your building. Just go around, look at all your systems, understand where outside air is coming into your building, and then check out to see if the dampers and the fans associated with that equipment are properly operating. You'd be surprised how things fail over the years and don't necessarily get noticed. You can see in the upper right of that picture there, the filters are kind of out of the rack. The air is actually blowing right around those filters. So that's a simple thing that you can visually check. And if you look at the little dollar sign up in the middle, this doesn't cost you any money. And this is why this is on the left side of that graph. This is a simple task, costs you a little bit of time, but it's something that really every not only school district, but any building owner should be doing in the wake of the pandemic here. And another thing to consider is operator overrides. I've seen those outdoor air dampers closed over the years too on purpose, and just by maybe maintenance staff not understanding quite what they're doing. So this is just a good pictorial of why ventilation is important. It shows you on the left there with the ventilation on, you're using that fresh air to kind of dilute the different contaminants that are being discharged from the people in the space. So if you turn that outdoor air off, like the picture on the right, obviously those contaminants build up quickly. So moving on, the next best practice is to review your ventilation schedules. To make sure that ventilation is properly coming into the building first. The next thing is, well, let's turn it on a little sooner than we need to and leave it on a little later. Some districts are even going to almost a 24/7 policy where they're leaving their ventilation on all through the night, and they call it, some people refer to it as a flush out. But at a minimum, it's the recommendation of most of the industry that at least 2 hours before occupants are coming and 2 hours after occupants, you should start to bring in that fresh air. The downside here is, that outdoor air, you're going to pay to either heat it up or cool it down. So there are some increased utility costs, but they're relatively small with the idea of what we're talking about in a pandemic here. So the next potential item here that you could do, or best practice, I guess I should say, is to measure the space CO2. People, when they breathe, they exhale carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide measurement, the level of carbon dioxide in a space, is a great indicator of how many people are in the space. So as there's more people in, the carbon dioxide level rises, and therefore your ventilation air should rise. So if you have a space, maybe it's a complicated HVAC system, you're not sure if you're properly ventilating it. A good way to do a quick check is to, measure the CO2 in that space. If your fresh outdoor air has about a 450 parts per million carbon dioxide level. So when a space is properly ventilated, you should have a level of somewhere between 800 and 1,000 parts per million. So if you purchase one of these sensors and go into one of these classrooms that's full of kids, and you want to make sure you do that in the middle of a class period after that level has carbon dioxide level has had a chance to rise up and get to its steady state. But if you see measurements of around 1,200 to 1,500 parts per million, it's really telling you that your ventilation system is ineffective for that particular space. And at that point, you really need to do, in my opinion, more observation and a closer look at your system. Moving on here, we can increase ventilation. So a typical classroom system brings in about 45% outdoor air, which means the other 65% of the air is returned from the classroom space. So if you think about that, systems are designed to bring in 45% of the outdoor air when it's 0 degrees outside. Because in Ohio, our temperatures can get that low in the winter, so our systems have to be able to handle it. Well, when the temperature isn't 0 degrees outside, let's say 35, like I have in the example shown here, the heating coil that's shown here in this unit, it has extra capacity built into it. So in theory, we could increase that outdoor air up to 70% and bring in more fresh air and return less air from the space, and greatly help those occupants. The downside here really is, again, there's utility costs, and that percentage is really based on what is the outdoor air temperature. And we're talking about Ohio here, and that outdoor air temperature, let's face it, can change from 60 one day to 20 degrees the next day. So this is something that you really have to kind of got to watch and monitor on a daily basis, really, and you almost need to babysit it to keep those percentages within the confines of the equipment there. So that's why this one's a little higher on the complicated scale. Moving on, we can look at filtration. The graph in the middle here shows you what they call a MERV rating, and that's associated with the size of the particle that the filter will capture. So the higher the MERV rating, the smaller the particles it'll capture. The big thing here is, MERV 13 is definitely the recommendation in a school building. And if your building is LEED certified, You most likely have MERV 13 in your system designed to handle MERV 13 already. But if you have an older school building, likely don't have MERV 13. It's pretty tricky here to just increase the rating on your filters, because if you think about it, it allows less particles through, but it's also harder to suck that air through there. So that existing fan that's on the right side there, sucking that blue air through that air filter, is it big enough to handle it? And that's kind of a question that you most likely need an engineer or a contractor somebody to help you evaluate. So that's why we kind of put this one higher on the complicated scale. And there's also increased fan energy associated with that. Moving on here to the next best practice, adding supplemental air cleaning devices and systems. So this one's a big one, and it's real popular. If you're sure you're doing everything you can ventilation wise, and especially when we get into these colder temperatures, one of the things you can do is try to create, use bipolar ionization to create ions for your space. So these are little devices that create millions of positively and negatively charged ions. They kind of break particles apart to kind of attract and clump with different microbes and different organisms in the air, dust and such. And really what this does is sunlight naturally creates ions outside. That's why outdoor air is fresher and it's safer. It's always, safe to breathe, because this is naturally occurring in our environment, all the time. So really what these devices strive to do is kind of create those same ions that are naturally occurring and try to create that same ion level inside by creating them with these devices. So this is a proven technology. It's been used a lot in casinos and stadiums and arenas and really high densely occupied spaces. But now in schools, it's definitely taken a front seat here with this pandemic. And you can see some of the different ways. You can do mobile units on the left there, and you can see an estimated cost. If you have all central HVAC systems, there's methods for doing that, and you can see a relative cost there. And then there's also, if you got more of a units that aren't a central HVAC system, but a unit ventilator system like the one on the right, they make systems that can accommodate unit ventilators and I guess non-central HVAC systems as well. So they're covered on all the bases with this one. And then finally, pretty complex is relative humidity. And really, relative humidity, its importance is threefold. On the bottom there, viruses survive and remain viable longer when the relative humidity is low. So as this temperature outside, and we go into winter here, decreases, obviously the moisture in the air and the relative humidity decreases as well. So when we talk about ventilation, we're bringing that outdoor air into our buildings. Well, essentially what we're doing is we're drying out our spaces by bringing in that dry outside air. And the virus likes this. There's definitely studies, not just this virus, but viruses in general survive longer in drier environments. People's physiological defenses are weakened. So the mucous membranes in our throats, in our lungs and mouths and things, they actually dry out, come thinner. So our defense mechanism for keeping these things out of our body are actually weakened as well in low relative humidity. And then the larger droplets that people, kind of come out of they dispel, and they actually dry out more. And when those larger droplets dry out, they become smaller droplets, and then they float in the air longer and turn into aerosols. So they're less controlled. And these are all reasons why you want to keep the idea of the relative humidity up around 50 to 60%. The trouble is most schools don't have humidifiers in them. And to add humidification to a large commercial school building, it's difficult. There's a high installation cost. There's a high operating cost associated with it. And it's something you really have to control well. An uncontrolled humidifying system, you can imagine, has some detrimental effects like potential for mold and things like that. So it's something that if you don't do right, can end up causing you more problems than it helps you. So it's why it's kind of on the far side of the complicated scale. And then last but not least here for me is it's the touchless fixtures, you know, plumbing fixtures. This is something I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is pretty easy to understand. This is a cool shot here of some laboratories that are outside restroom spaces that have that are sensor operated. Another one to consider is bottle fillers and drinking fountains, or drinking water coolers. A lot of people have disabled the drinking water coolers in their schools and installed you know, touchless bottle fillers on top. So if that's something you haven't done, we would strongly recommend you taking a look into that. And these are items that really start to, you know, affect the occupants in the building. You know, previously those are all items that are kind of, you know, things that are above the ceiling, ventilation area and things when you talk about it. These are in the spaces. And I think Becky is up next here, and she's going to talk a lot more about different things that are within the spaces.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, my next portion here, we'll talk about really specific things or ideas that might work for your school district that you will see your staff and students interact with on a day-to-day basis. Some might be realistic for your buildings, some might not, some you might already have implemented already. I think it's without question that school districts throughout the country, world have been phenomenal adapters during this entire pandemic. So I think these are just some different ideas, and to give you some thought starters or a resource to ask or to look for if you see something here or want some more ideas for your space. Like Andrew said, the first one we want to talk about is how to reallocate or reconfigure some of your existing spaces. This was all a very rushed and immediate need to adapt our school buildings. So how can we take some of your spaces you already have and turn them into more pandemic friendly uses in your space? So one I would want to focus on is the clinic. We've seen a lot of schools take a look at their clinic space, which is often pretty small, depending on the age of your school building. And how can we capture some adjacent space or another area of the building to help create more of a holding room, or for those kids that might be showing those contagious symptoms of a cold, a flu virus, or COVID. So we've seen some use their regular clinic continued for their day-to-day nurse activities, students coming in with injuries or questions, insulin, different things like that, but then also capture a room nearby that might be an office space or a storage room, and try to use that space as a place where kids can sit or stay as they're waiting for their parents or a ride home. To tie in with what Andrew said, it would be great if that space had an outdoor window or more of a negative pressure ventilation system. But of course, all of that has some cost and complexity to it. Also utilizing your larger spaces for your teaching spaces. A lot of schools are capturing their gymnasiums, their stages, their student dining to double as classroom space, and keeping in mind that acoustics as well as just the general feel and making those spaces comfortable. They're made to be for huge groups, and if you're trying to put a group of 20 to 25 students in those, you just want to make sure that you do what you can to make it acoustically helpful. Maybe we have some panels that you bring in. There's some different flooring materials that interlock that you can put over your gym floor or your hard surface dining floor, just to help it protect those floor surfaces from damage that they don't normally see, but also just help it feel a little more comfortable to be educating and learning in that space. We've seen a lot of school districts have their specials teachers especially become more mobile and go to the classrooms to help reduce that hallway traffic and reduce those shared space uses so the students stay in place. Also to rethink your entry vestibule. We've seen a lot of school districts be creative in how they allow parents or visitors to drop off student belongings. So placing a small table, if it fits and doesn't inhibit traffic in your entry vestibule, or even some have looked into having a mailbox outside where you can deposit items give the school a call, and then a staff member goes out and retrieves those items. Some other things to think about is your materials and maintenance. Now, there has been a lot of studies done about this virus as well as others about how much is actually transmitted via surfaces. So if the virus falls on a surface, how long is it alive, active, can it be contagious? There are some studies out there that shows it is much more of an aerosol virus, but keeping the surfaces clean is of course on the top of everyone's mind. So just making sure that you are paying attention to what cleaning solutions you're using, that they are not too harsh or too damaging to the materials that would cause you long-term cost implications, but also some of the organizations like the CDC as well as others have provided lists that you can find that are cleaning products that are proven to be effective against the virus. Also, just consider hard versus soft surfaces. Please don't be afraid of carpet, especially carpet tile. If you've put down carpet in the last 15 to 20 years, that carpet tile does not inhibit growth, and if it's maintained regularly, it can be just as effective as hard surfaces as inhibiting the growth of organisms. So please just don't feel that you have to replace your carpet tile, but if you have questions, we're always here. Designers, sales reps, manufacturers are here to help and can talk through the science and the different testing on those surfaces. And if we go to the next slide, this is more of a conversation about fixtures and furniture and how they can be effective. I'm sure you all are very aware of this. I'm sure you've already helped done some work on space dividers and seen what's all out there in terms of temporary walls, dividers, even ordering furniture to quickly change from group tables to individual desks. But there's a lot of resources out there, and we encourage you to always reach out and ask if you have questions. What I'm showing here is just some products and ideas to think about the long term. So it's easy to quickly buy something or quickly put something together, but there are some products out there that you can invest in now and be able to use continually in the future as mobile marker boards, acoustic panels in some of your large spaces, even tack panels for a mobile art gallery in the future. Once the COVID-19 pandemic is past us and we're on to more of business as usual, there are products out there that will help you now and in the future. And this slide is to talk about some other ways to use visual and audio cues to help the educators and the students inside your classrooms and inside your building. We all know that you can tell a student to do things many, many times, but a much more effective way to do things is to use some different subtle visual cues to help guide their behavior. So one proven example is, of course, some vinyl decals on the floor, pointing arrows. We've also seen schools use some tape on the floor to help direct traffic throughout the building, divide spaces and things like that. If your district's already doing this or you're thinking about doing it, just make sure you use professional vinyl flooring graphics, or you use more of a painter's tape product. A long-term use of a duct tape or anything else might leave that adhesive behind, and it's going to cause some long-term maintenance damage in the future. Another thing to do is to help celebrate that hand sanitizer in your room. I understand that that sounds like a ridiculous statement to say, but it's a long psychology and human behavior fact that, you know, humans kind of pay attention to the shiny thing in the room. So if you can make it more fun with music or maybe some twinkle lights or anything like that at the student's height, they're more likely to automatically turn inside their room, look at what's catching their attention. And if it's the hand sanitizer bottle, or if it's the sink or the hand washing element, or their masks on a hook, that's what they're gonna go to right away. The picture up in the right is just a creative way that we've seen a teacher use lighting in their classroom to help convey a message of it's time to put your mask on or it's time to wash your hands by changing some lights around her marker board and teaching wall. And another idea is just to get outside. I know this is a hard request in the thinking about the winter in the Midwest, but I think it is still possible. And there's ways to make it more attractive and more conducive for your teachers and students. One is to definitely make sure they're under cover. Another idea is to bring out some temporary heaters. Also, make some regular teaching materials available. Mobile marker boards of glass or even porcelain enamel can withstand those low temperatures, and so they can be wheeled out and used as a regular classroom. And just keep that in mind as you encourage your staff and students to get outside both at recess and during regular class times. And now we're going to go back in the building, and Ben's going to talk a little bit more about tech and lighting.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, and to kind of build on that, I know Becky kind of hit on the sound reinforcement, and I always go back to one of my favorite Thanksgiving and Christmas movies is Peanuts. You know, if you think about in the series, you always hear the teacher go, wow, 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 wow. Imagine teachers trying to speak and teach when they have something over their face. So sound reinforcement systems, I think, are becoming more impactful. As you're becoming flexible, you need to get that sound reinforcement into the space when people are wearing masks. So that's another thing to consider if you're moving into a gym or outside. How clear is your message when you're speaking to students? And then finally, Wi-Fi. I think Wi-Fi is great. Virtual learning is really upon us, but one of the limitations is your internet speed and bandwidth. I mean, we've ran into districts that 30 teachers or 30 classes all of a sudden wanted to go to a virtual session, and now you have video and audio going across the internet, and you're realizing that latency and even network cutouts are occurring because your internet speeds are not robust enough to handle this kind of traffic. So just encourage you to go talk to your IT director, your internet providers, and determine if maybe upgrading your service is something you need to look for as you're doing these virtual learning sessions. And then finally, lighting. I know Andrew touched a little bit on this, but UV lighting seems to be becoming popular. Both mobile units, as seen in the image, we're actually seeing the UV being built into fixtures in the ceiling. And what UV lighting is great for is it can eliminate viruses altogether in the room. I think it's a great solution, but there are some complications that arise from that. Obviously, the room needs to be unoccupied when these are being used. As you're well aware, UV light can cause skin damage and eye damage. So there's just and also on top of that, it's an expensive thing to purchase. The market quite hasn't got there yet. So these are things to consider. We see them coming in the market, and something maybe down the road you should look at entertaining. Just a friendly reminder though, even if you do use UV light technology, you still got to implement those basic tasks of washing your hands, mask wearing to really reduce the effects of COVID-19. So I know we went over a lot of information. I hope you had a great few takeaways from that, but I think overall we just see schools are transforming both in how they teach, their facilities, how kids are learning. And I think in order to adapt and transform, you have to be innovative and work with all your means and all the information provided. And I think that's where you can find architects, engineers, interior designers that really can work with the school and staff on coming up with these unique solutions. So we just look at transformation occurring over time. It's going to continue to transform. And I think to be flexible and open to change is something that we're going to see for a while in the education world. And this is just a really, I thought, awesome model to kind of sum up everything we talked about. We call it the Swiss cheese model. It's a basic concept that you got your virus here on the left, the particles, a person on the right. And every decision that you make as a school district and a community is a slice of Swiss cheese. Now, these decisions that you're making are not perfect. Each decision has imperfections or holes, as you will see in Swiss cheese. So wearing masks is great, but if one person is and one's not, there's an issue. And by layering all of these decisions, you can come up with a solution that helps success and creates safe environments within your school district. So this is kind of why every time you make a decision, recognize it's not perfect, but it's just another layer in the Swiss cheese model that helps prevent the spread of COVID-19. So with that, we want to just say thank you very much for taking time out of your day, join us for this session. We hope you had a few takeaways from it, some lessons learned. We really encourage any questions, comments. If you have anything you want to bounce off of us, we're here to be your partner, your sounding board, and we just look forward to the opportunity of working with you. So we hope you enjoy the rest of your virtual session, and thank you again.